Managing Violence Podcast, Season 5, Episode 5, with Daz Norton. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another episode of the Managing Violence Podcast. This week, I am joined by one of our long-time supporters and a long-time social media friend of mine, Mr. Daz Norton from the UK. Daz is a fantastic writer of articles when it comes to self-defense, martial arts, and violence management. He is a 5-time inductee of the Martial Arts Hall of Fame in the UK, as well as the founder of the award-winning Fendo Integrated Defense Systems. He has a lot to say. He has a very interesting background, so let's dive straight in to Mr. Daz Norton. I'm joined by Daz Norton here from Fendo in the UK. Daz has been a big supporter of the show for, ever since the beginning, and we've been connected on social media for quite a while, and it's good to finally chat in this context. So welcome to the show, Daz.
Cheers, Joe. Nice to be on.
Daz, for people that don't know anything about you, if you're part of the Managing Violence tribe on our Facebook group, you will have seen Daz's articles, and he's an excellent writer when it comes to explaining some of the concepts that we take for granted in violence management. But for those that don't know anything about you, what's your story, Daz? Where'd you come from? What do you do? What is Fendo?
Well, first of all, let me apologise for my accent. It's a very rough accent from the UK. Some of you might actually realise that I'm from a place called Birmingham. So who am I? I've been around violence pretty much all my life, right from a little child, play fighting in the playground, going all the way up. I come from I wouldn't say a really rough area, but it was well known for fighting, or should I say street fighting. When I was at school, I started going through quite a bit of bullying towards myself. I used to blank out quite a lot, and I used to have very violent episodes within myself, to the point where sometimes my other friends who had a grudge against somebody would tell them that they've done this or that against me, and I'd lose my temper and start fighting with them. It had nothing to do with me whatsoever. It was just my temper that I couldn't control. So my dad saw this in me and said, "Why don't you try boxing?" So I started up boxing, I'd say at around the age of 13. I enjoyed that. I didn't like getting punched quite a lot.
I have the same problem.
But I stuck with it. Yeah. So I stuck with it for a couple of years, on and off. Never got really far. It was sort of into club sort of. That's about as far as I went. Never went into competitions as such. I think around the age of 16, 17, I think kickboxing probably started coming in around there. I'd been out of boxing for quite a while, and somebody mentioned trying kickboxing. Now, I joined the kickboxing and loved it. I stayed within that for a couple of years, and then the game dropped out, as kids do when you start working and beer starts getting involved and going out with your mates. You tend to leave off that. But that started another type of thing within me myself. Whereas I used to like going out Fridays and Saturday nights. I used to drink quite heavy and always getting in fights, and that was my idea of a great weekend. Going out, getting in a fight, getting locked up, getting let out in the morning and back in again Saturday night. That was my idea of fun.
It actually tallies quite well with everyone else I know from Birmingham as well.
Yeah. So it went on from there. I got into security working in frontline security within the supermarket chain as a store detective. And I was introduced to a guy called Eddie Dunn, who I used to work with, a very close friend of mine, who introduced me to martial arts and told me to give that a go. I started a martial art called Chong Shin Do, run by a guy called Martin Blakeway, a very competent instructor. It was sort of a mix between Taekwondo, Aikido, and Jiu-Jitsu. I took a liking to that and gained my first Dan black belt. But it used to frustrate me quite a lot when the area that I worked within security was in one of the roughest places within Birmingham, very well known for problems with heroin, drug abuse of all types. And with people who are on heroin like that, they'll do absolutely anything to get the fix. So every morning, you'd wake up in the morning with your adrenaline pumping because you know what your day was going to be like. And you had that adrenaline rush throughout the day until you got back in your car to make your way home. But I used to get quite frustrated when getting into scrapes and fights. The fact that I never ever managed to get any sort of technique used on anybody that I'd learnt within martial arts. So that's what really.
I'm laughing because I can
Joe.
relate to that. There's so many scraps that I had where I thought, oh man, if only I had done this. But I just want, like, I'd have a bucket list of techniques that I just wanted to make work someday, and never seemed to work.
Yeah, totally frustrating. You know, I'd have it in my head, right, if this happens today, I'm going to use this technique. If that happens, I'm going to use this technique. It all went out the window, as you can well relate to.
No doubt.
But that's what started me on my road then into, started me on the road to reality-based self-defense. That's when I sort of came across, somebody said to me, why don't you try this guy? He's a bit different on YouTube. His name is Rich Dimitri. I don't know if you know that guy or not. I'm just joking. So I started following him, and I was absolutely amazed on the stuff that he was teaching. And besides that, I was sort of in and out with Rich on watching what he was sort of teaching, mainly watching the shredder. Never really got involved much about the psychology and the physiological effects and all that sort of stuff. So I started to follow the usual, a bit of Jeff Thompson back in the day. And then I came across a good-looking chap called Lee Morrison from the UK, and was absolutely smitten with what he was teaching because it related to me very, very much in the style that I was used to using myself. So I sort of learned a lot of the stuff off that, but then came to realise then that my true vocation in life was to teach self-defense rather than combatives. Because my thought on is you can never teach somebody how to be a fighter. You can teach them how to fight. You can never teach somebody how to be a fighter in that sense.
That's really interesting, man. That's really interesting. Sorry just to hit pause on your story there for a second.
That's fine, mate.
There's a lot of people, and I'm sure we'll get into this knowing the topic that we're going to discuss, but you said something really interesting there that a lot of people probably won't understand, that your cause was to teach people self-defense, not combatives. How do you differentiate the two? Because there's a lot of people out there that think combatives equals self-defense.
Yeah. Well, with self-defense or self-protection, as some of us like to call it, I like to teach, it's not all to do with the physical. Now, we know it as, I think, the ratio is something like 60% is psychological, 25% is emotional, and only 15% then is the physical act. So I've come to the thinking of teaching people the physical aspect of self-defense, which is so simple to use that it could be used by anybody of any size, any sexuality, etc. But obviously, use the psychological aspects of violence, what happens to yourself within when you're faced with violence, the physiological changes within yourself. We're teaching pre-fight situations and management within that, post-fight management, courtroom, survival, things like that. So I wanted to teach them the whole gamut. But now with combatives is more to do with fighting, in my own opinion. So let's take combatives for an instance. I like to go and sit within courtrooms. I'll go in of a morning. I do it twice a week if I can. I go in of a morning and look on the list in the magistrate's court and see if there's anything for self-defence. So let's say you was in a courtroom and you've got a good solicitor there, or a barrister, whatever you'd like to call them, who are absolutely smoking hot at what they're talking about, their subject. And you say, let's say, I acted in self-defence, and they'll say, right, is it true, Mr. Norton, that you teach blah, blah, combatives? Yeah. So do you know what combatives actually means in the dictionary? What is that? What is that? Does that say under that heading? Well, combative means eager to fight. That's what it means. So what they do then is start to pick faults out of that. So you're a fighter then. You don't teach self-defence. You did not use your self-defence. You were using combatives in order to fight against that person directly. You're not defending yourself. You're fighting against that person. And that can get you really into deep water. So you really need to know the differences within self-defence and combatives. So combatives, in my opinion, is more to do with learning how to fight. Self-protection or self-defence is learning how to protect yourself. One is defensive, one is offensive.
Yeah, I think that's a fairly succinct differentiation, but it does amuse me that even people within the industry tend to use them interchangeably. When you look at the origin of combatives, combatives comes from the military, and it was to do with in close quarter combatives, close quarter range fighting with an enemy.
Yeah.
The only goal is to dispatch the enemy as quickly as possible.
That's right.
In recent years, that evolved to potentially arresting and interrogating suspects and so on. But generally speaking, it wasn't about de-escalation and talking the person down, because it came out of trench warfare. Right? You're not going to
exactly.
talk your enemy into jumping out of your trench and going back to his own. So I mean, that's completely different to the origin of self-defense being for the average civilian keeping themselves safe from ruffians, if we go the route. Anyway, I interrupted your story, so you're
that's all right, mate.
Yeah, you've decided that your calling is teaching self-defense.
Yeah, so within that, I've sort of been teaching at this point self-defense with my own system. Basically, it was, I would like to say, more to do with combatives at that time until I started to learn otherwise. So I began following Rich Dimitri even more and started getting really deep into what he was teaching. And like I say, I was absolutely amazed in the material that he was putting out there. So at this point, I always wanted to see the shredder and to feel what the shredder felt like as someone who was being delivered to. So I was introduced to a guy, ex-special... Go on, Tony Joe.
Yeah, sorry, I'm grinning away because I had the exact same thing when I first saw it. I was like, I don't know about this. I've seen a lot of bullshit in the martial arts, and I don't know about this. The first time Rich ever shredded me just passively, I was like, oh, okay, that's a thing.
Is that when he put his shoulder out, Joe? When he was
no, he shredded me before that. Yeah,
right.
That came later.
Yeah. So I mean, anybody who's had the shredder done to them doesn't really would think back and say, well, didn't really want that to happen, but there you go. So at this point, I was introduced by a guy called Tremaine Kent. I don't know if you know him, ex-Special Forces.
Yep.
Fantastic guy. And at that time, he was teaching. In fact, he still does. Teaches a system called RAID, which stands for Rapid action, initiate defence, I believe. So I was fortunate enough to train with him and experience the shredder firsthand. I then took his course over a period of 10 months. It wasn't all physical, really in-depth academic as well, all to do with the psychology and the emotional side, you know. So that started really getting me riled up to teach this sort of stuff to the general public. So with that, I combined it with the stuff that I'd already used in security myself, which always seemed to work for me. And then made that into a system which I called Fendo. Well, it's actually Fendo, which is integrated defence system. So it's a lot of everything sort of poured into one. So, and going back also, I was on the working within security. People used to see what I was like. In those days, there was no SIA, Security Industry or Authority, I think it is. There was nothing like that in place at that time. So realistically, you could do more or less what you wanted to somebody if they started fighting with you. So people started to take notice of what I was like, the way I handled myself and things like that. And unfortunately, I sort of drifted off and went into the wrong side of violence for a while. Mainly doing things like enforcement and that for people, especially loan sharks, and going and getting their money back for them. But that wasn't in my nature. As much as I had a terrible temper and I was willing to hurt anybody within that moment, I wasn't the type of person who would like to inflict it on somebody just for no reason that wasn't personal to me. So I came out of it, and so I saw the other side of it, going back to when you used to fight in the pubs, going back to working enforcement like that and delivering violence upon somebody directly. I have that experience as well, the other side of the coin, if you know what I mean. So I've got the experience of self-defense, and I've got the experience of being the person that I want to teach people to defend themselves from.
Yeah, well, self-defense 101 is don't take a loan shark's money. That's a good way of avoiding that situation. But it is a valid point, and it's something we've talked about with previous guests. Those that have that unique experience of being on the other side of the law provided the rehabilitation goes well, or they just were, it was a blip in the radar, tend to have a different perspective on what self-defense actually is versus someone who has never walked out of their cul-de-sac as such.
Yeah, sure. So I was going back to teaching now. I was teaching my own sort of thing with a lot of concepts of Senshido thrown in, because I'd been subjected now to that. And I still follow Senshido very closely and hope to one day be involved with them myself. I do teach the shredder here in the UK. That is another aim of mine, to sort of bring that to a wider audience within the UK, because it's not really set in place here. There's nobody here who teaches it. I think there is one guy, but he doesn't. He's not active within teaching the shredder and some of Senshido's concepts. So that's where I am at the moment. That's about it, really. It's so here I am at the minute. Obviously, we're in lockdown at the moment. I'm doing lots of one-to-ones with people. I seem to get more joy with that at the moment. I've got classes in Birmingham itself and all across the West Midlands. But hopefully, it'll come to a wider audience. So yeah, that's it, Joe.
Interesting, mate. So it's a. I mean, there's a lot of us within this area that have a similar background in that we grew up, we did some sort of combat sport or traditional martial arts, and then somehow or another that ends up leading to some sort of security work or law enforcement or military, one of the three, which tend to be the quote unquote warrior professions, I guess. If if you're interested in combative application, and those tend to be the areas you end up in. And then you end up coming to the other end of that and going, I've probably got something of use to teach people. And I always say that people end up finding God at some point, whether it's God or spirituality or just a softer side of life, or they start realizing that there's something more noble than a really good right cross. And start the broader picture. Hopefully, there are some that never reach that point, and they just keep knocking people out until they eventually knock the wrong person out. But
yeah, exactly.
yeah. There are some I met in the industry that have been there for 20 odd years, and you just think one day, one day this is going to end well.
Oh, yeah, I know plenty of them people. Yeah, plenty over here.
Exactly. You mentioned and obviously we have done an episode with Lee, and I always thought that Lee was kind of like the late 90s / early 2000s evolution of Jeff Thompson. I thought he kind of picked up where Jeff left off. His material is and very similar in nature, but like you say, very combative focused, which is good for a certain environment, has limitations in other environments with other clientele. So
exactly. You tend to get the certain type of person as well learning that. Not so necessarily people with egos, I would like to say, but some people, a lot of men like to have that within them, that they're able to protect their family. But like we say, they don't really realise the differences between the two, so they can't differentiate and decide of what avenue to go down, if you know what I mean.
Absolutely, and I think that's. I think, as I've discussed previously on the show, I think all these different sort of subsets and systems and methodologies, they all have their place, and it's just a matter of being exposed to enough that you can make the right decision at the right moment for what skill set is going to be most applicable to you. I mean, if I woke up at 3 o'clock in the morning and there was a couple of people in my house and are intent on doing me harm, I would be going straight to the Urban Combatives Manual. I wouldn't be worrying about the de-escalation a great deal, but
no, exactly.
But if I bump into someone on the street at the moment who's having a bad day because they lost their job, I wouldn't necessarily want to be doing the ridge hand to the throat and stomping his head until he stops quivering. So, but
that's right. Yeah,
it's a different thing. But
so I think it's.
Sorry, you go ahead.
Yeah, so I mean, not saying that there's anything wrong with learning combatives, because there's absolutely not, and it's a great passion of mine to learn stuff such as Lee Morrison's system. But it also, if you're learning self-protection, you should learn self-protection, but it doesn't hurt throwing in things such as combatives, like Lee Morrison teaches. There's no harm in doing that whatsoever. It's just adding more tools to your tool bag, sort of thing. But I've got a great passion. I love Lee to bits, and Lee's the one who spurred me along really by watching what he was teaching out there. Like you say, he's a modern day Jeff Thompson. He's put a lot of useful stuff out there for the general public.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's move on to the topic of the day, and something we batted back and forth, and we're just talking about what's wrong with what's being taught as self-defense. And it is interesting because when you and I both started, I mean, most of what was being taught as self-defense was traditional martial arts, and now I see that has evolved. I don't know if it's necessarily better, but it has evolved. So I'd be interested in your take on what's being taught as self-defense and what's wrong with it.
Yeah, I mean, like I say, I started to get in self-protection or self-defense when learning martial arts. I realised that these things didn't work basically when the shit hit the fan. You couldn't access anything that was fine skills orientated, such as, I think one time this is what really started getting me thinking. With the work that I was doing, was working in a volatile area, terrible drug problems. And I was trying to restrain a guy. We'd gone into another shop actually within a shopping centre or a mall, whatever you like to call it. And I remember getting him into a wrist lock, and he was struggling. And no matter how much I was putting this wrist lock on, it just wasn't hurting him. And because there was loads of shelving had gone everywhere in the shop, there was makeup on the floor, and we both slipped. And as we went down, I heard this almighty crack, and his wrist had gone. But
Oh.
it's this guy never even noticed. He was still fighting on, and no matter what I did, I just could not restrain this guy. So, lucky enough, a few members of the public came to help me, and the situation was resolved. So I'd gone to that point knowing that sometimes, as long as I was in a calm situation, I could apply these things. But these things were not working against somebody who was, say, had mental issues, mental health issues, or drug issues. So that's what really got me on that road. So this is when I was learning self-defense within a martial art environment, but it was all traditional use of self-defense. So the old usual attacker moves in with technique A. Defender uses technique B, move away, and steps back in to strike the opponent. We all know in reality that doesn't work. Okay, violence is chaotic, it's ugly, it's terrible. Okay, it's nothing like what you see in the movies. It's something that even to this day, as much as I used to like it going back as a young kid, I hate it now. Violence is something that should be avoided at all costs. So I obviously realised at this point now that what I was learning in martial arts just didn't work. So that got me on the road then, doing a hell of a lot of research as to why this wasn't working. So, we started to understand the effects of adrenaline and what you can access at that point when under extreme stress. And over the years, I've tried various different martial arts, some because I'm intrigued of how it works, some because I like what it represents. And I've not got a problem with martial arts as such, because I think it's a fabulous thing to do. Teaches a hell of a lot of discipline and structure and things like that. But the problem is they're stuck in the traditional ways. Now, this is where we get into what I like to call the bullshit cycle. So you have an instructor who's been taught by his instructor. Now, at this point, he's totally believed what his instructor has taught him over the years. He's gone on a long journey to get his black belt, and now he's an instructor. So he teaches the same, and it goes down and down and down. So it just comes up in a full circle, the bullshit cycle. So they don't know any better. So then when you try to introduce yourself and tell them what you're about, and that I don't go in there saying this is all crap, let me know it's done. I like to offer my services, explain what I'm about, and ask them if there's anything I could do for them to help them change their view on the way I look at violence. So I can go into a class and explain what violence is all about and what happens during a fight, what happens to yourself within a fight. So you seem to get a lot of martial artists that sort of shun you away. They don't want you to come in and spoil what they've learned over those years. I don't know whether it's to do with ego. I don't know whether it's because they refuse to believe what really happens in reality. I don't know. So trying these other martial arts, everything that I've learned has never ever come out of me in a stressful situation whatsoever. I don't think there's absolutely anything that I can think of that ever worked, apart from things like judo throws. I think that's about the only thing that's ever worked in anything that I've learned over the years.
Yeah, there's a really interesting progression there when you look at traditional martial arts systems, and this is something that I grew up doing traditional martial arts, and I still love traditional martial arts, and all different contexts.
Yeah, yeah,
I love them from a historical point of view, from an artistic point of view, from a self mastery point of view. Uh, but when you look at how most of the systems evolved, if we just take the Japanese systems, for example, I mean, most of them that, if they have any battlefield origin whatsoever, we're talking about 300 years ago that they were last used in a battlefield context,
yeah,
400 years ago. That's about 12 generations of instructor to disciple where no one has actually used the technique in battle. So each generation,
yeah,
I mean, look at what's happening in martial arts at the moment. We're all being forced to adapt. We are now seeing a first generation of instructors that are seeing the ability to teach in a bedroom to a camera as an essential part of teaching martial art. Right,
yeah,
that's the first generation that's
yeah, yeah,
actually gone. Okay, if you want to be a martial arts instructor, you need to
yeah,
be able to run Zoom. That's a new thing. But you've
yeah,
got 12 successive generations that have all had different priorities to be able to keep their practice going, and different political influences, different
yeah,
societal influences, different clientele that want different things. And you see as that evolves, teacher to student, and each level of or each different generation adds its own unique needs and desires. The system changes. It doesn't mean the techniques aren't valid. The
yeah,
techniques, even if they're taught, if the techniques are exactly the same as they were for battlefield techniques of the 1600s, which is great, but they're probably not going to be taught the same
yeah, sure,
because I mean, I think it would be rich that they gave
exactly.
the story of a student said, "I can't do this technique to you because it's deadly. It'll make your heart explode," or something like something like that. And he said, "Well,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
have you ever killed someone with it?"
yeah, yeah,
And he's like, "Well, no." He said, "Well, how do you know it's deadly then?" "Oh, my Sifu told me." "Well, has your Sifu ever killed anyone
yeah.
with it?" "Oh, no." "Then how does he know it's deadly?" "Well,
No,
because his Sifu is like, well, so how many generations back do we have to go before anyone killed someone with this lethal technique?" Um, and when you look at it that way, I mean,
yeah, yeah,
there is a lot of trust. And if you spend 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 years, 20 years of your life studying under someone, it's a lot of cognitive dissonance to say, "Well, actually, I invested a good chunk of my life in bullshit." Um, so there's a lot of factors
yeah,
going on there. I think what you outlined there is the perfect approach in that you guys have got something that's completely valid, but you may have lost your way in how it's best taught and the delivery system and the
yeah.
nuance to applying it. Let me help you fill in those gaps. I think that's perfect.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I was just about to get to there. It's how many people that learn martial arts actually know. Um, so let's take, for instance, Wadaru karate. How many people actually know what those kata actually means, which is broken down, because you can guarantee that their sensei above them doesn't know what it is, and you can guarantee the people above them don't know what it is. But when you look at it in detail and you watch somebody doing the kata, you can actually see where that could be used in today's modern violent world. It just needs tweaking and used, for modern day. That, like you just said, that's all it needs. But in order to get through the door and help people understand that is another thing.
Yeah, and I think there's an element there of a lot of people like to say they're learning for self-defense, but they're really not. I mean, they're learning because they like the
Yeah,
uniform, they like the hierarchy, they like the structure. Yeah, they're like the social outlet, whatever it is. But I mean, they're not
yeah, and there's nothing
really
wrong with that
self-defense.
whatsoever.
Yeah, of course not. But
Yeah, yeah,
it's sometimes confronting to say to someone, this narrative you've been telling yourself about why you train is actually incorrect.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And I mean, even there's certain combatives out there at the moment, especially the Israeli stuff. I've got quite a love for some of the actual original Krav Maga, but when you see it nowadays, it's all been watered down, and it's become unbelievable. Not all of it. There's some guys out there that are teaching the traditional stuff, and they're very, very good at it. But I think, like Ryan Hoover said on one of your shows, um, it has all been watered down. They've lost uh, they've lost their way, I would say. But then again, you're looking at the bullshit cycle. They're only learning what they've been taught, and it goes around. But you find that these sort of systems have cottoned on now to teaching avoidance and awareness, things like that. But that's about as far as it goes. They don't delve into the other aspects of self-defense. And if they did, I think they'd start to realise, where they're going wrong. I'm not just picking on Krav Maga because there's other things out there, as we all know. But like everybody seems to have lost way, which is where I like to believe that we're all singing off the same hymn sheet at the end of the day. We all want the same outcome. So you should be able to let other people in and help you. We should all be working as one unit in a certain way. And I've always been one for that. I'm continually learning. I don't learn what I know, and that's it. I'm continually learning. This goes back to the days when you used to be given a radio for your birthday, and you used to think, oh, I wonder how that works. So you start unscrewing it and stripping it apart just to see how it works. It's the same with self-defense. You take it, you strip it apart, you rebuild it, try and make it work for you. If it doesn't, you scrap it, you carry on, and that's how I like to work myself.
Yeah. Actually, it's interesting what you mentioned about Krav Maga and the evolution there, or devolution potentially. If you look at how I think where things went south for Krav Maga, and I'm certainly not a historian in this regard, but I have done a little bit of homework. It seems to be the expansion into the West as it hit America, because all of a sudden, I think there was a very popular women's magazine article on Krav Maga in like the early '90s saying what an amazing workout it was, and then all of a sudden, like everyone had to have a cardio Krav Maga class because that's where the money was. All right. No one wants to be confronted by a mugger in a padded suit that's going to pretend to assault them like that, but they're happy to stand in a line and do 20 knee strikes in a row because it gets the glutes burning. So I think that's the nature of commercial pressure, right? That's the reality of being a martial arts instructor in the '90s and even now is that you got to give people what they want. But I think the downside of that is if you forget your origins and you're no longer teaching the original stuff, that eventually gets lost. And I think that's kind of the burden we have in a privileged first world society is that most of our students are never going to be in a fight. And because of that, you can basically teach whatever you want and no one's going to be any the wiser.
Sure.
When you see countries like, if you see the Krav Maga that's taught in Israel, it's quite different. If you even Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, if you see Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu taught in the favelas in Brazil, it's different to competition Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in California, right? It's because people are actually experiencing violence and they're a little bit more preoccupied with what works and what doesn't.
Yeah, sure. And they adapt it to make it work for them in that situation. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. What you mentioned there about sort of filling the gaps. If you're going to go into a martial arts studio, or even just say you're talking to someone who has a martial arts background and they're interested in how to apply it, and maybe they've got the typical first 2 pages of the awareness manual lecture once, and that's the limit of their quote unquote reality based experience. What sort of information do you think helps fill those gaps the best?
To start off, like you just said, they've got the avoidance, observation, and things like that. They've already got that part of it, the awareness part. But even when you just speak to people who've never been involved in a violent situation, when you explain exactly what happens in a situation, how you're feeling with it inside you at that point in time, even just that amount of information given to somebody in that situation absolutely baffles them. You see the look in their face of they just cannot believe what you're telling them. I had a guy who started with me, lovely guy, suffered with the odd anxiety problems to do with he was always worried about what would happen if he was attacked and things like that, to a point where he was getting really bad anxiety with it. So obviously I never introduced that level of violence to him straight away, but as we progressed and I started teaching him about that sort of thing, he was absolutely gobsmacked of what happens out there. So even just that alone, but then when you start talking to him about the different types of fear, just for instance, like the pre-fight, the primary assault fear, the secondary fear, the tertiary assault fear, and the post-assault fear. You know, there's a whole range of things that everybody needs to learn about, such as those 5 fears there. You know, how many people actually know what different fears are, what your experience during that fight? So then you introduce things like, we just say, a fear management, how to sort of adapt yourself to overcome fear within that situation. And then we go on to talk about conflict management, de-escalation, even using deception within self-defense. There's a lot of people out there that doesn't realize what a tool deception is in order to prevail in the self-defense situation, and giving you that opportunity to use your concept or your technique, whatever you want to call it. So even things like that, and even post conflict, you know, what would you do after the fight? What happens? What happens when you need to call the police? What happens when you need to write a statement? What happens when you're talking to your solicitor? What happens when you're in the courtroom? Everything like that all associates to self-protection as a whole gamut, as I'd like to say. And a lot of people don't understand all the intricacies, I can't even prepare words there, to do with self-protection itself. And I think a lot of those things needs to be brought into martial arts to help them understand, and then even then sort of adapt what they're teaching traditionally to work in modern day.
Yeah, I think you raised so many valid points there. I mean, the gaps are numerous. I wouldn't mind exploring that concept of deception. I like what you said about fear, but I think that's probably a topic that deserves its own podcast. But about the application of deception.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I think deception is, as you said, it's very underrated, and it's different for everybody. So I'd really like to get your thoughts on what are some of the deceptive techniques or strategies that you teach.
Yeah, so deception. Let's just take, for instance, somebody's in your face. They've come up to you, and they're mouthing off. So you've learned how to manage aggression to that point in your training, through scenario replications and things like that. I think was it Sun Tzu, I think, from The Art of War, says something to the lights. What was it? All warfare is based on deception. Hence, when able to attack, we must seem unable. When using our forces, we must seem inactive. And when we are near, we must make the enemy believe we are far away. You know, it goes on like that. So, pretending to be weak, a lot of people sort of shun the idea of being weak. Usually tend to find that it's people with ego problems. So when you're in a situation, somebody comes up to you. I like to use a open-handed stance. I don't like to use a traditional fence stance because that just seems unnatural to me. That looks more like a fighting stance. So if you're using the old fence with the left hand out, providing you're a left-hander and your right hand cocked back, you've only got to close your fists, and that's a fighting stance. So in the modern day, obviously, when we're looking at CCTV, they can't hear what you're saying, but they can see what your body language is, and that can get you into a whole heap of trouble just there. So I like to use a nice, calm stance, open-handed, palms facing out, or sometimes, me preferably, I like to have my hands, so the back of my hands are facing the person I'm talking to, and use hand gestures how you would normally talk. So you can pretend to be weak, saying, I don't want trouble, please. So what you're doing, the way I like to describe it is this. The attacker is a knight in shining armor. He's standing in front of you, and he knows that he's got you scared. You're in fear for your life. Okay, and when you start to let him know that you fear for your life by acting weak, you're slowly stripping the armor away from him, bit by bit. So his adrenaline is now dropping. Okay, you're remaining calm within yourself. His adrenaline is dropping. His armor's coming away, and then suddenly, by using deception, by asking a question, you are triggering his brain. So whether a lot of people don't realize that if you ask somebody an open question, whether they intend to answer it or not, their brain will react to that question. And at that very point is the perfect opportunity to strike or to run, whatever you want to do at that point. Now, because you've stripped him of his armor and his adrenaline's gone down now, your adrenaline's still going, but you've got it under control. So your attack on that person at that point in time will be tenfold to what it would be if his adrenaline is up. And that's why I like to use deception within self-defense.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really good articulation and explanation of that. And I think this is why understanding the psychology of violence is so important. I mean, if I'm training, let's say I've had any number of students that would fit the bill of, being a average 5'4" to 5'7" female in her 20s with, out with her friends and being harassed. That is the sort of person who's going to approach and be aggressive towards her is completely different to the sort of person that's going to come up and cause an issue for me, because someone who's picking a fight with someone who's 6'4" and 120 kilograms has a completely different psychology, right? There's so many different factors.
Absolutely.
I mean, why? I mean, I'm the usually not the easiest target in the room. There's something else at play here. But understanding that allows you to know how you apply those deceptive strategies. But yeah, I mean, I see so many self-defense systems that look, they try to do the right thing by saying, well, we're teaching verbal de-escalation, we're teaching verbal strategies, and all they do is basically have a sparring match that starts with stop, get back, get back, get back, get back, and now we're fighting.
Yeah.
Right, that's actually not de-escalation. That's a command.
Yeah.
And that's completely different to de-escalation, and it has no application to the psychology of violence. But they think, oh, we'll tick the box now.
But then you've got to learn. You've got to understand the other side of it. So you're taught to stand there in your traditional fence, the Jeff Thompson fence, shall we say, and you're shouting back off, back off. But you've got to understand that a lot of people won't interpret it as being back off. They'll understand it as you shouting fuck off. So
exactly,
which is absolutely true, and you've got to understand that. So that now makes you the aggressor. So you've just got to watch all these little intricacies. Learning deception and what you say at that very point in time, it all makes a difference,
especially in the minds of the witnesses, who are usually drunk anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Everybody's got phones these days as well, so that's why I never like to use the traditional fence as we know it to be.
Yeah, that little guy dropped into a fighting stance and started yelling at him to fuck off.
Yeah, exactly.
No wonder he got hit.
Yeah. So it's little things like that, I think we all need to sort of understand what could happen by using these things. And it's like, we've come a long way since Jeff Thompson. Obviously, he's the grandfather when it comes to self-protection. But Lee Morrison's brought it forward, and it's very rare he uses that stance himself nowadays. So it's everything's becoming more modern now for the modern world.
Yeah, I agree. It's and look, I think there's absolutely nothing wrong. And when you take into context, I mean, where things were at before Jeff, it was a quantum leap forward in terms of even responsibility. It was a massive leap forward. But that said, I mean, there are many that started picking up on that in the early 90s and just sort of thought, okay, that's as far as we need to go, and that'll do. And they're still teaching that 20 years later or 30 years later.
Yeah.
But
exactly.
I think the likes of what Rich is putting out, even what Tony Blair's been talking about since the 90s, is
Yeah,
hugely important. And Rory Miller and so many others that we've had on the show as well, about just understanding there's human elements and that there is a cost to this. And I think that's that's the unsexy part about self-defense and martial arts, is that we're teaching you skills that if you ever use them, your life is probably going to go really, really south for a little while, or sometimes a while,
yeah,
which is it's not great to put on your marketing, but
yeah.
that's the reality.
I mean, I'll tell you a little story going back. Just it wasn't me fighting directly. It was outside a pub. So I'd finished my days of fighting on a Friday and Saturday night, and I'd come to a point where I'd prefer to go home back to my wife and my child, But we'd come out of the pub. It was shutting up time. Come out of the pub, and there was a fight outside. This guy had knocked the other chap down on the floor. He was out cold, but the other guy, the aggressor at the time, decided to jump up in the air and come down on his head. And this guy lost the sight of his eye. And he did actually die at that point, but he came around. I had to resuscitate the guy, basically, and sit there with him in my arms, blood everywhere. He was in such a mess, and I had to sit there until the ambulance come there, hugging him, keeping him awake. It all went to court, but the person who had started the fight was a very known football hooligan at that time. He spoke to somebody who knew me, and the next minute I got phone calls of people I know saying, you need to withdraw your statement, because there's people all over the Midlands, there's people as far as London asking what your address is. Have you got a wife? And then telling me that they're going to find out where my child goes to school. So that was it straight away. I mean, I've gone into survival mode there. I'm trying to withdraw my statement from the police. I can't withdraw it. It's already out there. So I had to have witness protection. I had to go into a court. All the courtroom had to leave while I went in, and I had to be shielded off. So you've got all of that involved. So I haven't even got into a fight at this point. I'm just a witness. That's all I am. But I've got all of this on top of me. I'm fear for my life. I'm in fear for my family's life. I'm getting bouquets of flowers left outside my front door as a threat. All sorts are going on. And basically, I'm living in fear for weeks and weeks, until one day I decided enough's enough. I'm not going to live like this anymore. So I made inquiries to find out where this guy lived. I went round his house. The wrong thing to do, I totally know. But I gave him an ultimatum. I know where you live, Sam's where you know I live. So if anything comes to me, it's going to come back on you. Totally the wrong thing to do. I shouldn't have reacted that way, but I did, and it worked. But what I'm trying to say is, you've got all of this to come. So you've dealt with the situation, you protected yourself, you go to court, but not only have you got to understand how to react in court, and a lot of people get put in prison not for their actions, but for what they say in court or on a statement, which is so important as well.
Absolutely.
So you've got to live with that type of fear after that. So you've got the post-event fear as well. And even that psychologically totally drains you. So you've got to understand that side of it as well.
Yeah. And look, I can relate to that. I had an incident off duty, which I don't think I've ever told the story on the podcast, but there was a situation where it was late at night, and I got involved in a situation in a car park, and without going into full detail, but I hit someone very, very hard, very, very, very hard, and was the most unconscious I've ever seen a human being. And the sound of the head hitting the concrete, just I can still hear it now, 15 years later.
Yeah.
And I remember spending weeks looking in the obituaries, looking in the crime section of the newspaper, just to see if he died, because I wasn't sure. Like I just got out of there. And this was after a couple of years of being involved in real violence. Like I wasn't a novice, but
Yeah.
just that one was just out of control. It completely blindsided me. I wasn't in the mindset for it. I was on the way to pick up a friend. I wasn't working.
Yeah.
But yeah, those weeks of just not knowing, it just, you'd wake up in the morning with your stomach churning with, am I going to get a knock on the door? Am I going to get a phone call? And I was just worried about the police. I wasn't even worried about his friends. Let alone if it is someone who's connected, then yeah, you really do have something to worry about. So it was,
it's frightening stuff.
yeah, it is. And the worst part is it's not like the fear leading up to a fight where you know it's going to end. It's not knowing when it's going to end. And like you said, I mean, you drew a line in the sand and you went to his house and that ended it. But I mean, you could choose to ignore it, and that could go on for months or years where you just don't know. Is someone going to put a knife in your back while you're walking in the park, or is someone going to threaten your child at school? Or it's awful. It's just awful to live that life.
Oh yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Just that alone, it's like, if it had been me just directly and I hadn't any dependence whatsoever, it'd have been a different outcome totally. But as soon as you bring into the equation your family and your child, it's everything changes. So rather than me becoming aggressive and dealing with it that way, I've dealt with it in a different way. It could have turned nasty for me, but it seemed to work at the time. So good outcome in the end.
Yeah, I mean, that's an awful situation. It's hard to know what the right thing to do is anyway. I mean, you've got to bring it to a head at some point, somehow. It's and I think this is the thing that frustrates me sometimes when I see otherwise good young kids, and normally boys, normally young men, that say, "Oh, I would have just knocked him out," or "I would have just done this," or "I would have just done that." It's like, cool. From your perspective of a 22-year-old, I kind of get it because I thought I had all the answers then as well. But you're playing checkers when you're on a chessboard. Like you don't understand the ramifications of these actions yet. I feel like everyone who thinks they know how to defend themselves needs to relearn after the age of 25 because the world looks different, and especially after you have children. Like once you've got children and dependents and a career and a reputation and social media and all that sort of stuff, I feel like everything you thought you knew needs to be reevaluated because the world is now different for you.
Yeah, exactly. It's everything changes.
Yeah, it's no longer about how flexible you are and whether you can kick someone in the head without them seeing it coming. If anything, those videos of you showing off on Facebook are going to look fantastic at the courtroom where you try to plead self-defense and you did that technique in sparring the week before. Looks a little bit more premeditated when you were showing off your spinning bottle kick. Anyway.
Yeah.
All right.
That's another thing going back onto martial arts there, talking about kicks there. You a lot of martial artists think that using kicks is a fantastic tool for self-defense in certain situations. Maybe it would, but how many people you stood in a bar and it all kicks off? How many people are going to use a spinning back kick and things like that? It's just little things like this sort, I think, needs to be brought to the front and help martial artists. Like I say, I'm not knocking traditional martial arts at all. I still love practicing them myself, but I know the difference, and I keep one totally away from the other.
Yeah. I like to use the analogy that if you were an Olympic swimmer and you wanted to do an open water swim, you would engage the services of an open water swimming coach, even though you may be technically a superior swimmer, because it's a different thing. It's a different environment with different risks and completely different circumstances. And I feel like that's kind of our role. We're the open water swim coach. You've got all the mechanics and you've got the tools and you're a good athlete. Let me show you what you're going to be dealing with so that you can then apply those things that you've built and those attributes you've grown.
Absolutely.
It's a matter of them realizing it's different. That's the first thing. It's But anyway, Daz, we'll head on over to the bonus round. But for those that are leaving us here, where can they learn more about you, engage your services, or go to train with you if they're close by?
Right, okay. There's a website. I'm currently restructuring it at the moment, but you can still head on over to there. It's www.fendo.uk. So it's just .uk. Where you can find more information there. You can contact me through email. My email's on there as well as my phone number. If anybody out there wants to train in my system, or even just to learn what the shredder's like, and experience that sort of thing, I'm open for anything like seminars or one-to-ones. So if you just get onto the website there, you can contact me at any time.
Perfect. All right, Daz, thank you very much for your time. It's been a fun chat. I'm glad we finally got a chance to do it after many years of social media acquaintance. And
Cheers, Joe.
Highly recommend if anyone wants to get a bit of an intro into Senshido or into realistic self-defense in the UK, make sure you head on over and check out fendo.uk. All right, Daz, we'll head on over to the bonus round. But for those that leave you here, thank you for listening, and thanks, Daz Norton.
Thank you.
Thank you once again to Daz Norton for a very entertaining conversation, and we have a continue of a very entertaining conversation in the bonus content, which you can access if you head on over to www.patreon.com/managingviolence to hear more from Mr. Daz Norton and myself. Also, I highly recommend that you head on over to the Facebook group Managing Violence Tribe, where you can read plenty of Daz's articles. Until next time, I will talk to you again soon.